Greetings and welcome to the Neurotheology YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about awe. And I'll be using the book, Awe, The New Science of Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life, written by Dacher Keltner. Now, Dacher Keltner is a world authority in emotions, but especially in awe. He did a global research study in how awe is experienced all over the world. And he's a researcher at UC Berkeley, professor, as well as the founder of the Greater Good Science Center. He studied under Paul Ekman, who himself is a really very well-respected researcher in emotions. So in terms of what Dacher Keltner describes awe, like what does he actually describe awe as? And he has some really simple definitions. Those are that awe is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world. And he also defines awe as the emotion we experience when we encounter vast mysteries that we don't understand. So in his research, he found that there are 8 categories. He calls them 8 wonders of life. And these 8 categories that cross-culturally people generally experience awe, he defines as moral beauty, such as witnessing courage or kindness, movement and dance, something he also calls collective effervescence or movement, nature, music, sacred geometry or visual design, also known as art, spiritual life, such as mystical encounters, life and death, or epiphanies. So as much as he describes awe in these simple definitions, he uses the book to really talk about how awe is experienced across those 8 different wonders of life. But if you want to get into the neuroscience, he has some really beautiful, very powerful bits on neuroscience in there as well. So he largely talks about the default mode network. And I have another video on this channel that describes the default mode network. But the default mode network, the DMN, it's basically a network of regions of the brain and their interconnectivity, which involves the prefrontal cortex, involves the precuneus, the hippocampus, the posterior cingulate, as well as other areas. But the DMN helps us to have introspection, to daydream. It gives us a greater sense of self. It allows us to think more egocentrically. But what happens if we spend too much time thinking about ourselves? It can go to the negative. It can lead to anxiety about the past or the future. It can lead us to depression. And he talks a bit about our default self in relation to that default mode network. But specifically with awe and these 8 wonders of life and art and nature and beauty and moral excellence, it draws us out of ourselves into the moment, and we can experience reality profoundly in that present moment, and it draws us out of that default mode network. But also with awe, there are different types of awe in the sense that if you're standing on the edge of, say, the Grand Canyon, it can be a little bit overwhelming. It might be kind of a little bit more fear-based awe. And he talks about how that more fear-based awe will lead us to have more of a connectivity between our default mode network and our amygdala, which relates to fear and helps us experience fear as well. But a more pleasurable, more peaceful awe, maybe being in the forest or seeing moral excellence in a safe place where you see your loved ones just being loving to one another. That sense of awe, that more pleasurable feeling of awe, will have an interconnectivity between the default mode network and our cingulate cortex, which is more involved in reward. So awe can be experienced a little bit differently in that sense. But he also talks about oxytocin. There's that social aspect of awe. He talks about how awe, building trust, collaboration, that is part of that social context, and how oxytocin's a part of that. He also talks about how awe can help us lower our stress level, but also our inflammation. And inflammation with cytokines can lead to some really negative health impacts. And our daily dose of awe can really give us more of that sense of peace, wonder, draw us out of ourselves. So there's a lot of talk out there about having a daily practice of gratitude. And I think with this resource, what I've tried to do more is have a daily practice of awe. And I would commend it to you as well, maybe even 2 to 5 minutes. If we can each have just a little bit more awe in our lives, the wonder and beauty that draws us into the vastness, it's going to break us out of that default self, that default mode network, and bring us more into the present moment, to be able to appreciate more collaborative, trusting relationships, find more love, more peace. And what I particularly love about Dacher Keltner's book is that he's so respectful of all different nationalities, ethnicities, religions, spiritual perspectives. He goes into Hinduism, all sorts of different secular perspectives, goes into Mexico because he's originally from Mexico, also talks about Julian of Norwich, a Christian. So very respectful of many different ways of engaging law, but I highly recommend the book. If you're interested in other resources, I have a website called christianneuroscience.com. It has all sorts of Christian resources on neuroscience, but I also have spiritualneuroscience.com that has all sorts of resources that are more academic or secular or interfaith. So hope this is of help, and I hope you find more awe in your life. Take good care.